cooperated enough that almost everybody has arrived. I will have some more opening remarks in a few moments, but I just want to first introduce Elder Mirna Kiknoswe to give us a formal opening ceremony. Thank you.
Me and microphones don't have good traction or whatever you want to call it. I might have to stand on my tippy toes here. Oh, it's a beautiful morning. Yeah, just sort of tilt it down. I'm doing the thing where she's pretending. Maybe that's better. That's better, isn't it? Hey, probably. Oh dear. You think we know each other, eh? Wana bajona de magana duk. Ishkute makasan clan disnikas mondo dem. Kajanan and Dunjaba. Udawatami Odawa Nishnabi Kwanda. Niswi Medewi. I introduced you to me in the language. My spirit name is Fire Moccasin Woman. I'm from the Loon clan. That comes from my father. He's the Budawatami part of me. And my mother, she's Jajuk, which is Crane clan. And yeah, and she's an Odawa. So our families, like the Budawatami and the Odawa, this is our homeland right here. And it is also goes into the United States, Ohio area. Along this river here, it's not known, I guess, in some ways, but there's some of my ancestors that are buried along this river here, the Detroit River. And so I'm just learning too. I'm just learning too about where they lived and where they've come from and where my family has come from. And that's really important. Like my mother, she's Odawa, which is another part of the Three Fires Confederacy. And my grandfather and his people were in Michigan. And then they traveled because we we didn't have the grocery store just down the road. We had to do all of those things. We had to hunt, fish, and trade for our livelihood and the things that we needed to use to live by. So that was all part of it. And I know with my mother's people, the Odawa people, they were in Michigan. They were up in by Sault Ste. Marie. They went across the top up there in Ontario, and then they came down what you talk about as the Ottawa River. That's Odawa. See, a lot of the language is intermingled within the words that you know about. So that's really important to understand. We were not just a people in one place. We had relationships with others. We had trading systems. We had all of those things before contact. So I just thought I'd give you that little bit. I'm from Bequetouanon territory right here. We're at the Detroit River. If you follow it up farther, you come to Lake St. Clair, which is also known as the Little Round Lake in some ways. And we are, where my community is, we are the delta of where Lake St. Clair and the St. Clair River connect. And that's part of my story. And then from where we are, it goes north to Sarnia, which is, and then to Lake Huron. But we're the delta there. There's 5 little islands there, and over years, our community has gotten very much smaller because the United States has taken over some of our islands. It's one of those lease agreements for hundreds of years that never got renewed or never got taken seriously. And then all of a sudden, and this is just a few years ago, our community got notice that we no longer owned these two islands that are part of our delta. They're now the United States. So it makes it difficult to try to move forward with your life when all of these things are there and you don't know when this will happen to you or your children or your grandchildren. What is the next step for all of us? So for all of those of you who don't know me, when I do the openings for this or convocation or the Indigenous legal orders, I remind people to remember to breathe. One of the things that happens to all of us as when we have a moment of surprise or a moment where we have to hold our breath, we lock into our being, that emotion that we were experiencing. And a lot of those emotions may not be positive. So that's why when we all come together with Indigenous legal orders or at convocation, I ask people just to close their eyes for a few moments, to center yourself, put your feet flat on the floor and close your eyes, and sit there and connect with the spirit as you know the spirit. We all have that connection. All of us, we do. Sometimes we put it aside and don't think about it, but it's always there. And that kind of movement is from the inside out. The more we can understand ourselves from the inside and bring it forward out to all the people around us, the stronger we will be as an individual, but the stronger our families and our friends and those who we work with will be, because we're at critical times right now. So I ask you just to close your eyes, and we're going to do a little bit of breathing. And it's very simple. You breathe in through your nose, bring it in, you hold it for a moment, and then you blow out your mouth those things that are blocking you. Breathe in the positive, and it's coming from the earth. You're holding it, and then blow out the negative. Breathe in again, and blow out anything blocking you. Breathe in again, and blow out that blockage. Continue breathing while I do this opening prayer. Abashuma Shumas. Ishkate Makasan Kwandis Nikas Mondodem. The Kajanan and Donjaba. Bodawadami Odawa Nishnavi Kwanda. Nisvi. Chimigwach Kajemnado for this most beautiful day. Chimigwach for all those things you have given us. From the sky world to the earth plane to the underground. For all those things we see and all those things we cannot see. For the wind, the rain, the ice, the snow, rocks, and the fire. The four-legged, the two-legged, the winged ones that fly in the air, things that crawl on the earth, things that swim in water. I'm truly grateful for all of those things. I'm grateful for all the plants and the animals, the medicines and the herbs, and the fruits and the vegetables. I'm grateful for the four directions, the east, the south, the west, and the north, and the sky world and the earth plane, and for all the medicines that they carry for us. I say, Chimi Gretchen, Mommy Gwendam, I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for the songs, the ceremonies, the drums, the shakers, the spiritual leaders around the world who speak their truth, hold their connection for all of us with creation, hold their connection for the universe. I say, Mommy Gwendam's truly grateful for that. I'm truly grateful for the sun that travels across the sky during the day, the moon that travels across the sky during the night, and for our most precious earth. She's the one that provides a place for us to walk on. She's the one that provides the sustenance for all of us, from the water we drink the food we eat, and the air we breathe. Without her, we would not be here. I say, I'm truly grateful for her. I'm truly grateful for all of you coming together to talk about this most important thing, these most important things in our lives, the way to the future, the way to the beginning, the way for our children to follow. As we lead all of these things, we think about those ones that are coming behind us. We think about their future and their direction and their ability to live on this earth plane. I say Chimigwech to all of you for traveling here safely and being here together with us. I say Chimigwech to you. Nikanagana, all my relations. Aho Miigwech. Thank you.
Chimigwich, Elder Mirna. Good morning, everyone. My name is Reem Bahti, and I have the honor of serving as the Dean at Windsor Law. We're very proud to host the 13th annual We Robot Conference, the first time that this important gathering has been held in person in Canada. As a law school, we grapple daily with the fact that robotics and AI are increasingly affecting every facet of daily life, with the benefits and harms of these technologies unequally distributed. The laws and policies that regulate these technologies will play an important role, I think it goes without saying, in determining our relationships with each other, as well as our attempts and aspirations to build a more equitable future. As Canada's leading voice in critical legal scholarship, Windsor Law defines itself as a justice seeking, community engaged, and people centered institution. And we are thrilled to serve as the site for your urgent and important deliberations about how law and policy regulate and ought to regulate robotics. As some of you may know, and as Elder Mirna has already told us, the Windsor Detroit region, where we are gathered here today, has long been a meeting place and a site of resistance and transformation. It was here that Indigenous nations gathered to engage in trade, diplomacy, and governance long before the arrival of European settlers, and that they invoked systems of law that honored balance, sustainability, and collective responsibility, principles that today's legal and technological frameworks too often ignore. It was also here that enslaved peoples crossed the Detroit River seeking freedom through the Underground Railroad. And yet, while Canada promised emancipation, true equality remained elusive. People seeking dignity and equality through their freedom faced racism, segregation, and economic barriers. Facts that continue in various ways and in varying degrees to this very day. The Windsor Detroit region has also served as a site where unions fought for rights that today's gig economy and technological automations threaten to erode. So, this is a place that's steeped in history, a history that's made even more significant by your being here today and the discussions that you will hold with each other. I just want to say again, thank you for coming to Windsor and to Windsor Law. I wish you a successful and enjoyable conference, and I look forward to learning from all of you. So I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Dr. Kristen Thomason, to welcome you as well.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming. It's so wonderful to see your faces here this morning. I'm so excited for our conversations. I have been thinking about this for a while, and this is one of the most hopeful things I've had the privilege of working on and being involved in, is bringing people together. We have at least 3 continents represented amongst the participants here today at a time when the social and political push is towards separation and animosity. It feels really special to be able to sit together in a room and have an important conversation across all of our different backgrounds, disciplinary and lived. And I just want to say too, I've heard a few times folks saying, you know, this isn't my area. Well, it's not, this is everyone's area and no one's area at the same time. I think something that's so special about We Robot is the way in which it is intentionally inter and transdisciplinary and inter and trans background. You know, we're really trying to bring people together from all different perspectives, so everyone has a perspective to contribute. And I really encourage folks to bring that to your question and answer in our panels. We really do focus a lot on opportunities for the audience to engage. I want to say some quick thank yous, although I'm going to say more throughout the day. And of course, I'm just eternally grateful to all the people who helped make this happen, because it's certainly a very large collective and team effort to pull something like this off. So thank you to all of the sponsors without whom this wouldn't be possible. Windsor Law, LTech Lab, Microsoft, University of Washington Tech Policy Lab, including Alex and Vannery, who helped me a lot with the peer review process. U Miami, Boston U, and the IAPP have all provided the critical funding that we needed to bring everyone together today and to feed you all as well as you will be fed. So thank you. The AI and Society Initiative at U Ottawa has sponsored the Ian R. Kerr Memorial Best Paper Award, which will be announced tomorrow at the end of the day. I'd like to thank you, Windsor Engineering, for entrusting me with taking their robot arm and putting it in an art gallery last night for our art demo. And the you and Windsor Engineering Mars Rover team, who are outside, and you'll hear more from them soon. RCE Detroit Windsor and the city helped sponsor the party that we had last night, and LTech Lab and Windsor Law helped support the making of the art that happened last night, which will be on display in a gallery in Ford City called Dry Goods Gallery. If anyone is sticking around for a few days, you can go get a nice coffee and check out our artwork. Research assistants, Saranga Ugamugle, Rebecca Zucker, who is manning our tech for us, 4 phenomenal LTech RAs, Christina Lee, Dana Elias, Nikita Nandisha, and Jessica Kabuli, who you're going to see around throughout the day, have been critical to making everything run smoothly today. The incredible team here at Windsor Law, Dahlia DeFilippi, Sue Arnold, Tuta Shubani, Melanie Momini, who's sitting right in front of me, Robin Herman, Liz MacArthur, and the whole IT team. Just, I also would not be here physically if it wasn't for all of them helping us out. The conference, We Robot has a program committee, and folks put in an awful lot of time to reading all of the submissions and deliberating and discussing. It's a 3-time anonymous review process that led to the papers that we have here today. So it's quite involved, and I really want to say an enormous thank you to the program committee and all of the little subcommittees that I carved out of that program committee and asked people to volunteer additional work. And my deepest gratitude to all the contributors and presenters who are here today. Your expertise, dedication, curiosity fuel the conversations that make this conference, truly unique and enriching. Whether you're here to share a scholarly paper, a tech demo, or a thought-provoking poster, your insights are invaluable to shaping the evolving legal, ethical, and social landscapes of robotics and automation. So as we set off on the next few days, I encourage everyone to engage, question, and collaborate, and use this opportunity to push boundaries of what's possible, to reimagine the future of law and policy in robotics, and to shape a world where technological advancement serves the common good instead of the, what did we call them the other day, the tech boy kings, the tech boy kings. let's let these conversations continue beyond this space as well. I want to flag briefly a few things to keep an eye out for. I mentioned that there will be an art exhibit at Dry Goods Gallery. That's taken folks who were there last night gave input into what the art should look like. It was collaborated through software and then spat out through a robot with a lot of human assistance. We really saw a helpful robot demo last night. So Dry Goods Gallery, keep an eye out for that. We will have a zine that will be made publicly available online, and we'll have hard copies if you're in Windsor, coming out of the techno-fascism panel that we just had, resisting techno-fascism panel that we had yesterday. And there will be a peer-reviewed special edition of the Canadian Journal of Law and Technology as well. Thank you very much to Susie Dunn, who's sitting right there, for collaborating on that too. So some of the papers will be available in publication form after the conference. So I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to take up any more of our precious time having conversations, but thank you all so much for being here. And I'm so excited for the conversation. Now I get to sit back and just listen and learn from you all. So thank you. And I'll introduce our first panel, which features Cynthia Koo from the Citizen Lab and Vasanthi Venkatesh, whom I have the privilege of being colleagues with here at Windsor Law.
It's gonna be a. Figure it out. He lowered it. Yes. Keep that one. Not made for short people. Barely.
Politics of tech design right here. Okay.
Stand is. Who's that?
You can stand. Hello? Oh, great. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for making it to the session. And thank you, Vasanthi, for an amazing paper. So how I structured my remarks is I'm going to give a very brief micro summary of the paper and then just some comments in no particular order about what I stood out to me about it, and then some potential suggestions as you continue working on it and revising it. So this paper is called The Racialized Treadmill of Robotic Agriculture, Colonial Legacies, Legal Exceptionalism, and Labor Control. It talks about how Canadian agricultural production is increasingly or has been a reflection of interlocking systems, both geopolitically, legally, and technologically, systems of exploitation. This is based on interlocking systems of automated monitoring, collection of both worker biometrics and plant metrics, and in particular through two technological systems that are focused on the paper. The first one is precision agriculture, and I'm quoting from the paper now, a suite of tools incorporating robotics, connected devices, remote sensing, artificial intelligence or AI, machine learning, and big data analytics designed to optimize production. The next system is high-tech greenhouses, which incorporates similar suite of technologies to optimize growth, but with severe impacts on the human workers within them. And so what arises from these systems is, again, intertwined dynamics of legal exceptionalism through agricultural and labor law in Canada, agricultural exceptionalism for this particular sector, and technological exceptionalism, such as through the use of drones, for example, which becomes a web of exploitation that entrap particularly migrant workers within these greenhouses and on these farms. Not only that, though, but the system has broader connections to the military-industrial complex, and where we see the same technologies that are used to oppress workers at home are also used to enact genocide and uphold apartheid abroad. So with that said, this is a sweeping paper in terms of, I learned so much from it, even though it's a really economical paper because we often criticize efficiency at all costs, rightfully, I think, in this space, but this felt like a very efficient paper because you covered such scale, both temporally, like dating back to like the first greenhouse in Roman Korea from the US transatlantic slave trade to colonialism back to present day, and then also geographically we went to Rome, Korea, India, Israel, Cuba, and then back to Canada. So you really had a sense of just how expansive these systems are, but you did a really good job of consistently bringing it back to Canada, to the Canadian system. So with these broad dynamics, I also really appreciated how it would have been really easy for this paper to kind of fly off into abstraction because you deal with such big concepts like colonial extraction, racial capitalism, data-driven dispossession of land, labor, and data. But again, it's interspersed with really concrete details like this is the specific drone model that's used, or like these are the specific companies that are implicated. There's a lot of really incisive lines to where you capture these relationships of power and dynamics of exploitation. And again, just like how interconnected they are. So in terms of thoughts that I had in response, this is just kind of random connections that might be interesting or maybe could spark further discussion. So I did not know before this that agricultural workers were also exempt in Canada, but I just know in the States, both domestic workers and farm workers are also exempt from labor law protections there, and it's extremely gendered and racialized exclusion. With respect to the smart farmer technologies, quoting from the paper, a practice that eliminates tactile knowledge while centralizing control in corporate servers. It is just such a, it's tried to say, oh, it's Taylorism, but it always comes back to Taylorism, which is the idea of separating the worker from the process of creation and from the craft. So in the past, if you took like a shoe cobbler, for instance, so they'd be able to know the whole process of creating the shoe, cutting the leather, sewing it all together. It was really like an artistic skill as well as a technical skill. And by transforming that to something that is atomized to an assembly line process of building shoes, you not only to skill, but you separate someone from the art because you have these people who had these amazing skills and then they become would-be, or the employer wants them to be automatons who can't do anything but like the one specific putting the rivet in or that one specific cut for that becomes their entire job. When it comes back to food, not only have consumers been distanced and separated from food through the grocery store supply chain, but now the producers of the food themselves are also divorced and increasingly separated from it, where everything just becomes remote and datafied. Another thing this made me think of is the panopticon, which I thought was, so I worked on worker surveillance at the Georgetown Law Center on Privacy and Technology, and our founding director there, Alvaro Bedoya, really was fond of saying that when everyone thinks of the panopticon, you generally think of Jeremy Bentham and prisons. But in fact, the panopticon was invented by Samuel Bentham, his brother, as a form of labor control. So it wasn't invented for a criminal system and for prisons, it was invented to control labor and then applied to prisons. It also made me think of Jefferson's dumbwaiters, where you have this global system of invisibilized labor. So Astra Taylor wrote an great article called The Automation Charade in Logic magazine. It talks about how Jefferson installed dumbwaiters in his mansion at Monticello because he felt guilty about the fact that he owned slaves. And this was a way to hide the fact that his household ran on slaves. So quoting from the article, the appearance of seemingly automated abundance Jefferson so doggedly cultivated required substantial additional labor, the labor of making labor seem to disappear. And so that's kind of what we have here too, but except on a global scale. I thought it was really interesting, the concept of securitization of food security, because it seems like there is a systematic drive towards securitization of everything these days. I know during COVID, like the peak of COVID-19, for instance, there was a lot of talk about how are we overly securitizing healthcare? And from like a tech-facilitated gender violence perspective, how many times have we seen national security agencies, police departments use gender-based violence as an excuse to expand state power and state surveillance, even while not actually addressing the substantive issues themselves or even perpetuating it themselves? And then finally, with respect to the tech transfer between agricultural tech and military tech, I thought it would be interesting to note that Gabriel Grill and Christian Sandvig are researching the connections between military spy tech and worker surveillance tech. So again, the same companies are selling spyware to both military, national security, and just run-of-the-mill employers to use on their workers. Okay, in terms of potential suggestions, one of the things that struck me is the idea of, you kind of start alluding to the idea of the romanticized concept of the farmer. And this is, when it comes to, so this made me think of two things. The first one is the idea of the romanticized solo genius artist in copyright law and how that's kind of been deconstructed. And then also, for those who have read Sherry Turkle's work and the impact of tech on human relationships, one of the things for me is I've always found that that can risk overly romanticizing or almost taking an essentialist approach to being human, like, oh, there's just something special about humans. And so I guess I'm curious if you think there's a danger of that, of kind of overly romanticizing, like the ideal farmer working in the field, and how that might impact your analysis. Then for the legal exceptionalism section, I really would love to see a hugely expanded section, maybe because I'm a lawyer, this section, and maybe you had this plan for a further draft, because the current legal exceptionalism section, it feels almost like a summary or the conclusion of the section I want to see. Like I want to see what is the actual legislation, like what is the case law that leads to these conclusions. Ontario recently introduced Bill 88, which was widely criticized for being insufficient. It's supposed to be a worker privacy bill, but it just requires employers to disclose if they're doing surveillance, but not actually stop any surveillance. But things like that. Or SOPIPIDA, for example, like I know the paper says that the data collected is considered agricultural data and kind of falls into the gray area. But before it becomes agricultural data, it's still the workers' data, right? So do they have a right under PIPIDA, for example? Because I think a lot of the privacy commissions in Canada have recognized that workers have privacy rights. Those rights aren't checked at the door or checked at the entrance to the greenhouse. So has anyone tried, or even just to make the arguments? Then the tech exceptionalism section, I think I was a little bit less sure about that part. So again, there's so many echoes in other sectors, like generative AI is used to, because the idea of technological exceptionalism is that the law makes an exception for something based on a specific technology. So for example, people like often criticize copyright laws saying, oh, okay, because something happens online, normal copyright law no longer applies, or how gig work is used because work is app-based, now suddenly normal employment law doesn't apply. Or arguably, because the internet turns everything to speech, suddenly everything is now First Amendment law in the US. So here, though, I think I wasn't quite sure what the technological exceptionalism was versus, like, it almost felt like there was an agricultural exception to how technologies are regulated rather than vice versa. So with drones, for example, and then with the dual use aspect of drones, because it seemed like, again, so because drones are developed for the agricultural context, but then they're repurposed for the military context, and that therefore implicates agriculture. I think that's true in a way, but also I can see how that could be applied to basically almost any tech, like even office software, for instance, you could say was developed for one context, but then are being used to create military plans that are then used to genocide. So that's like a facile extreme example, but I guess how would you distinguish? And then finally, I was just curious to see if you had thoughts on legal reform recommendations, for example. So like, again, this goes back to what is the current actual legislation and case law, and then what would you change to address these issues? Is there any way the benefits can be retained without exploiting workers, or does it just kind of all have to go? And then is there any way, I guess, both for consumers to divest from this system? Like, is it a matter of farmers markets and starting to grow our own gardens? And then also, let's say the agricultural industry does want to itself divest from the military ties. Is there a way for them to do that? Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. And then, yeah, I think so. You get a few minutes to respond, and then afterwards, we open the floor for questions and comments.
Okay, thank you so much, Cynthia. That was really, a detailed and a fantastic summary of the paper. what I was trying to show in this paper, and I think it addresses your first question on what you call the romanticized idea of the farmer. But it's not just the romanticized idea of the farmer, and I talk about this in a previous paper, but a romanticized idea of agriculture itself and how deeply agriculture is tied to settler colonialism and to the military industrial complex, which people don't get. And you spoke about the Taylorism and Fordism and so on. So one of the labor activism against Taylorism and Fordism led to labor laws in industry. Whereas what I was trying to show is that what we have is industrial agriculture, and that the techniques of Taylorism and Fordism, where you have atomized, where the farming is made into atomized labor tasks, is in agriculture as well, but it does not have the labor protections that industry has. I mean, the labor protections in industry may not be great, but that's still way better than what you have in agriculture. So, but the core aspect, I think, was to show that that how it deeply intertwined agriculture is with state and with the military industrial complex, especially. And if you take both Israel, making the desert bloom was very much the narrative of Zionism, which was so crucial, not just in the process of Zionism, but also in the portrayal of Israel as a technological, as this technological, it was technology is very much a part of brand Israel, and how that goes across in agriculture forms a big part because the greenhouses that are there in Leamington are part of the export and import between this triangle that is caused by Netherlands, Israel, and Canada. That's the structure there. So coming back to, I think your third question is that why is drones or why is the greenhouse technology different from, say, using Microsoft, is that if you trace the history of agriculture, if you trace the history of all these technologies that are used, like DJI Agras, Monsanto, Bayer, these are all the big players, Deere, these are all the big players in agriculture technology. And it's not, they are very much part and parcel of the military industrial complex and of the complex of settler colonialism, which is quite different from a firm coming up with a software which incidentally gets used in military. So this is, in many ways, this kind of tracks what people like Ruth Wilson Gilmore did with the nonprofit complex, and what others are thinking about in the plantation complex. So the plantation complex forms, in fact, the core of how the analysis works. And I think that is the part that is so important, is that the political economy of agriculture is very much the political economy that was set in place during plantation economy and during the plantation era, which is why people call the new system that we have of food production plantationocene, and that's one of the frameworks that's used commonly in that structure. So in some ways, if you think about the technological exceptions in agriculture, you're right, like it focuses more on how it permeates within agriculture. But let's take Pipeda, for example, privacy. It's going to hit, and it's not, these are all new technologies, so it's not as if they have even, and that's one of the things that happens in agriculture too, because it's so invisibilized. I mean, I don't know how many people here has even seen a farm. And even if you're taking, even though most of Ontario's farms are between Toronto and Windsor, we don't even get to see them unless you're taking Route 3 as opposed to 401. And if you go on Route 3, what you see is endless greenhouses, endless greenhouses. And in the evenings, those greenhouses are these, they look like the Northern Lights. That is how technological they are. And I wish I could put a picture of how it is. And they are all temperature controlled for plants, whereas you have workers in there, racialized workers in there, who have to toe the line or to march to the beat of yield productivity. And this is very much similar to how indentured and slave labor was used in plantation times, where they had to tow the labor to agriculture productivity and feeding the burgeoning middle class of the Industrial Revolution with these cash crops, tea, coffee, chocolate. None of that is subsistence farming. These are all luxury consumer products for food. And it's very much the same. And I do take, I do I'm not here to look how to protect Canadian agriculture. So I'm not going to be doing that section with thinking, well, how best do we do we have technological regulation to protect Canadian agriculture? Because Canadian agriculture basically is settler colonialism on steroids. And and the way that works, let's think about tomatoes. If you have to protect the tomato farms, what we're talking about is this complete destruction of the farms in Ghana, in Mexico, and all these places where nature has said, well, you're the place where tomatoes are supposed to be grown. But instead of that, what Canada has done is done this corn dumping, Canada and the US, corn dumping into Mexico. And if you see how these have changed life, is that if you go to Mexico, for example, corn is part of these three sisters. It's part of the indigenous production of corn. Is part of these three sisters. So every plant will have a legume, a beans, a squash, and a corn. So it is like this whole structure that you have. And so this three sisters, instead of these three sisters farming approach, has been dismantled. And what you have is a dumping of Canadian corn in Mexico, which has displaced the farmers of Mexico, many of whom are indigenous, and they then become the source of labor for Canada to plant the very same products, which is destroying their farms. So it's creating a cycle in which these workers are made complicit in their own destruction, and that no amount of reform in technology law over here is going to work, because the interests of the Canadian state is going to be Canadian farm. And we have to challenge that aspect. And that's why it focuses more on agricultural exceptionalism than necessarily technological exceptionalism, when very much they are intertwined with each other. So I think that is the background that I'm trying to bring about. And if you think about labor, what it goes into is basically in terms of dispelling myths. As I said before, it's this idea of the farmer is even small farmers. In fact, a lot of small farmers in Canada are part of the migrant worker movement, because they see the same aspect in which this global production of food that's happening is disrupting their own food practices. And I think that is a very core part of this process, which we have to think about what technologies have done. So precision agriculture, which I go into in the paper, is where the farm is basically a smart farm. It's an automized farm, and the farmers don't even have to be. They could be living in Bali and having farms in Canada, and making sure that Indonesian workers come to Canada to pick the organic cannabis that we all like to smoke, I guess. But the point is that the thing that I'm trying to say is that what this precision agriculture has done is that we are able to show through precision agriculture how industrial labor looks like. And in some ways, that has been the perverse positive aspect of technology in agriculture, because before the myth of the myth of the agriculture farm was so strong that no matter all the studies which show that there's no difference between agriculture and industry, it was never taken up. But when you see technology in agriculture, all of a sudden in stark, the robots and the drones that you see flying over the fields now immediately bears to mind any kind of technological sector. And so in a way, what we are able to do through technology is actually dispel the myths to show that, look, there's really no difference. And these robots, and we spoke about robots yesterday, and it's quite fascinating to understand the political economy of robots that's happening here. So no matter the technology of robots that are there, it's almost impossible right now for those robots, not impossible, it is possible for robots to pick tomatoes. Apparently, that's a very skilled part. So picking blackberries is even more difficult. Picking mushrooms and cannabis is its whole different thing. So a robot takes 1 minute to pick one tomato. 1 minute. The latest robot technology coming out of Guelph. And a worker does, you can imagine, right? 15 to 20. A robot costs, I think I have the prices there, 100,000, about 100,000. And you need one robot per acre. Whereas, and that translates to, if you do the calculations, it's still labor that they want. So if what has happened, and you can see the numbers, is that the more the technology has increased in agriculture, the more the demand for labor has become. You know, every year, the number of migrant workers who given permits to come here has been increasing by about 11 to 20%. So now, before even like 7 years back, when there were 30,000 farmers, now it is 70,000 farmers coming into Canada. And this is when technology has actually increased. Why is that? Right? Why is that happening? And the reason for that is that technology is able to do these things, these control of the environment in the greenhouse, for example, to increase the yield. If you're increasing the yield, somebody has to pick those vegetables. So you need more workers to be able to take advantage of the technologies that are happening. So it's a very perverse way that in agriculture it has worked, and this is why the agricultural treadmill is something that has been talked about at length as to what technology does in agricultural treadmill. What it does is it's consolidate big ag in many ways. And what it also does is that the benefits of agriculture ends up having to rely ultimately on surplus labor. So, and Marx talks about it in Capital as well, like how it is so limited. And I think these are the dynamics that I talk about. So a lot of the paper is the political economy of technology and agriculture. And then the last section, you're right, that I do go into it's a very some ways almost like a superficial analysis of the ag tech. But one of the main things that I want to show there is like these exceptions, such as the ag gag laws, agricultural laws. So you have these ag gag, so where provinces have passed regulations, and states all over the world, in fact, in the name of biosecurity. There is you cannot, activists or Justicia for Migrant Workers, for example, cannot enter those farms to do any kind of investigation on exploitation of plants, but also of animals. So in fact, the people that it has affected the most are actually animal justice activists who want to show how the exploitation of chicken and animals there. So in order to protect the farms from animal rights activists, you now have these ag gag laws. But what these ag gag laws have done is that it has completely removed any kind of way to see what's happening inside these greenhouses. And so the enclosures that colonialism created, these legal enclosures, we are seeing that again with these laws which are enclosing these spaces even more. And these agricultural, and so we have to think about regulations as agriculture, as these kinds of ways in which enclosures are produced, is what I'm trying to get out there. It's still a first draft, and I don't think I've parsed a lot of these aspects yet.
And an excellent first draft it is. Thank you. I was going to say, as I was reading the paper, I couldn't help continuing to think of the croissant robot example from yesterday. And also, I don't think we can talk about tomatoes and tech this much without somebody mentioning Langdon Winner and like STSOG the artifacts of politics. Okay, so with that, does anyone have questions, feedback?
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Sue Gluck. I was in Microsoft's legal department for many years, and now I work for my 21-year-old cat. And I'm a huge We Robot super fan. Thank you for this paper. I thought it was excellent. Um, and just the kind of paper I like, where you've done a really good job, but there's room to grow and an opportunity to take in feedback. So that was wonderful. But more importantly, in these troubled times, we need work like this. You've humanized faceless migrant agricultural workers and their plight. And I think that the best way for people to get their heads around the problems of surveillance capitalism is exactly with a use case that puts a human face on the problem. So I think this is a fantastic paper. Thank you. Couple of recommendations for reading. Ifoma Ajunwa at Emory Law wrote a book called The Quantified Worker. She starts with the quantifying work by slaves on plantations and traces up to issues of modern workers in modern workplaces. And I think you'd enjoy it. And if you'd like an introduction, she's a good friend. I'd be happy to introduce you. Another book I recommend is by Karen Levy, who's at Cornell, Data Driven, Truckers, Technology, and the New Workplace Surveillance. Karen, with co-author Solon Barakis, actually did field work on agricultural workers and things. I don't think I couldn't find the paper, so I don't think they actually finished the paper, but I think that would be beyond reading the book, which is great. A conversation might be helpful. And again, I'm happy to facilitate an introduction if you'd like, because she's also a good friend. In the book, she's done a extensive field work on trucking and surveillance of truckers, and how importantly, how they fought back against this mandatory surveillance. And I think that that's the thing I wrote when I finished, the note I wrote when I finished your paper was, how do we change things? The ag-gag laws make that incredibly challenging, you know, because there is no human face on the plight of these workers because of things like that. And that's, that raises sentiment for making change, for pressuring lawmakers to make change. So what do we do? And I thought Cynthia's feedback was great on further amplifying the, sections about the laws and things, but going beyond that, like, what can we all do? What, the different people who read this paper in different walks of life, what can we do to help this? Because I think helping in this instance can help in all the instances. So anyway, thank you for a great paper. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. And I love the recommendations. Can't wait to get at them.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Peter Acero from the New School. Great paper. So many thoughts that evoked from this paper. So I'm going to try to organize them, but they're not that organized.
It was very hard to organize the paper for me too, so I get it.
So I thought, you did this brilliant job of sort of describing this and making all these connections between these different areas and this history and how that functions with labor and political economy and technology and agriculture and food and all these things. So, but I'm also wondering, like, there's some sense of like, why, if you're going to go back into history, why stop at settler colonialism and plantations? We see this also, the exploitation of labor and feudal agriculture and all of this for centuries going back, right? And it's evolving in these different ways. And then I'm also thinking, like, there's so much more to unpack in this relationship between the Yemen farmer and technological progress itself, right? And if you look back at the emergence of that whole concept, which really I think comes from like the Royal Society, right, itself. And if you look at like the first, I don't know, century of publications of the Royal Society, it's all how do you put the manure on the tree and all of this stuff, which is like, oh, they suddenly have time because of all of this colonialism to kind of like, oh, let's experiment with our farms and then become this idea, right, that continues. And then you look at the last century of industrialized agriculture and say, like, what's this sort of concept of progress that's been driving all of that? And it's tied to this idea of we can always sort of improve productivity and efficiency in this very automation way, but we're also deploying scientific knowledge. And you look at golden rice and hybridized corn and GMOs and pesticides. And then that drives right back to what I also kind of, you sort of hint at the beginning, but don't quite come back to, is like the debt traps of buying this expensive technology that binds people into it. And this idea of productivity of food. And it's always this argument about feeding everybody, right? And I think this is part of also this exceptionalism of food, is that, oh, if we don't have food, we're all going to starve to death, and food insecurity and food security are crucial. And that drives this exceptionalism. But at the same time, none of this technology is looking at food waste, where we could actually save so much more food than by overproducing things that we're already overproducing. Why aren't we trying to save and use and efficiently distribute the resources? And there's almost no sort of innovation and application of resources to those problems. But kind of as the question, I guess, is reading all of this, I'm like, okay, so what do we do? Like, what can we learn from this analysis of, okay, so is this going to help us better organize labor on farms, or shift immigration policy, or find new ways of sort of intervening technologically? And I mean, part of what I'm arguing is maybe thinking about applying technology in other ways instead of this sort of intensification of labor and automation. But I'm just wondering what your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, those are really great thoughts. I mean, with respect to the human farmer, I mean, I hint at in the paper, but it's really interesting how what's called a rule of colonial difference happened, where there was a massive change in regulations during colonial times, which you see now. And one of the biggest tools was where these labor exceptions and criminal law exceptions were done in plantations, and then agricultural protectionism was put in place in Europe and Turtle Island. And all of it was to do with this yeoman farmer. So the yeoman farmer is able to have his combine just because you are able to extract the labor from the Caribbean, so that it creates this system in place. So so it's always benefited. It has always benefited people who are able to take advantage of colonialism. But I think it's really fascinating, your last question, and I haven't gone into it because I only read it recently. Jason Hinkle has written this really great article on degrowth. There's this bunch of heterodox economists who are thinking about the economy from this idea of degrowth. So what he is able to show, I could be getting the numbers wrong, that all you need apparently is 30% of all resources. So that includes labor, any kind of natural resource, plant, to feed the entire population of the world and give them the certain basic amount of shelter and clothing. So that leaves 70% of what's being produced still used and even if you take 70% of that, even if you take 50% for luxury and just being having fun, you still have this massive amount of stuff that's being produced that nobody needs, that we don't necessarily need, right? And that's where your food waste thing comes up with. So, and Raj Patel talks about this in Stuffed and Starved as well, that we are producing so much food and so much food is being wasted at the same time. And so even at the times in which there has been massive famine in like Ethiopia, in all these countries, it has never been because there's been less food. Right. So this again, this idea of myths, we go back to this idea of myths that we have to protect food production when there's not a problem with food production. There is no, so if you see that most of agriculture economy is driven by cash crops, and that includes soybeans and all of this, where like entire Amazon, like parts of the Amazon in Brazil, has been deforested to grow soybeans, for soy milk and for energy and all of that. So there is this whole problem in which we are thinking about it, and yet at the same time we are approaching it through this idea of crisis, that there is a food crisis, and almost like, and I don't go into it very deeply, but this neo-Malthusian idea that the problem why we have a crisis is because there are too many black and brown people in this world, right? And so there's a population problem, and the population problem is driven by the global south, and so it is the global north which is involved in this high-tech production of food, where, okay, we are also producing food for the rest of the world, but we are also making sure that our people are protected. So this neo-Malthusian narrative is such a crucial part of food production, but also, as the studies have shown, even part of environmental protection in general. So if you have to think about what do we do, I think we have to dismantle these discourses first. So starting with thinking about economic growth, or these productivity as like an end goal of any form of regulation or policy. It should be the reverse, which means in some form we should be rethinking our relationships to land and thinking about how we can have regulations and policies that change the whole system that we have in place. And my tracing of the colonial laws was important to show that this is not an unimaginable task, right? I mean, as I mentioned yesterday, the people said that the sun won't, sun doesn't set on the British Empire, and Britain is no more in many ways. The British Empire is no more. And the empire was created with regulations and policies that were very well deployed to extract. So we can still have policies and economic changes to go towards these ideas of what these heterodox economists are talking about, thinking about degrowth, thinking about this going away from hyperproduction and going. I don't want to use the word sustainability, because sustainability has also gotten into this very neo-Malthusian discourses, but going into changing our connections, socio-economic and legal connections with land itself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wasik. I'm from Oregon State University, PhD student from School of Public Policy. So there was this course, New Media and Society, I took last term, and that was, I think, one of the articles I read was Ghost Factories by Edward Jones Imhotep, and he talks about how, like, even in history, there have been incidences where the public, are so enamored by technology that they fail to see the labor behind it. And also, like in that course, I studied about how the history of automatons, and like in the 17th century in Europe, there was a big boom in clockwork devices and all that. And again, the same thing could be seen today. Like at those times, it was the mechanical philosophers who controlled these new advancements, and they had these roles to play in terms of governance and management. And nowadays, we can see the same thing in the corporate world, where they are the ones who are inventing technology and setting the rules. To say so, in this liberal society where the corporations play such a large role in setting the status quo, how do you think we can actually make some meaningful changes, because it's not in their best interests?
Yeah, I mean, I have to read this. So much stuff to read, but that I got really excited when you said the word automaton, because one thing that I don't know if people know this, but a lot of automaton technologies was developed during the Islamic era. In fact, automatons was very much, which is why a lot of even 1001 Nights has things which almost are very automaton like. So
there was a lot of water clocks as well.
Water clocks was a very important aspect. So that this whole idea, this whole Eurocentrism that pervades technology, and a lot of the the history of automating goes back. In fact, the peak automatons were during that time. So, but I think what you're asking is the problem, which is why I keep going back to the economic aspect. Like, we cannot regulate corporations without changing our idea of what a good economy is. And that is the start, right? We cannot talk about techno-fascism or any of these things without having us actually rethink economy and rethink these ideas. So there is no, and so it's not a question. I think a way law works is very much a floor way, right? Like that's how law works. Let's have this floor below which we won't go. But so what we're talking about is a ceiling, because basically what hypercapitalism has done is just the ceiling. We can't even see the ceiling anymore. Right? It's going to Mars. It's going to it's going to outer space. So I think the question is, how are you going to put a ceiling? And neither regulations and things are we are not at the discourse. In fact, I was talking to somebody about even how using a lot of these words like techno-fascism is kind of like fear mongering, because what it does is, let's go back to thinking about what can we do as a ceiling. Let's not have Elon Musk, but it's not Elon Musk who's behind all of this, right? So we have to really rethink of law and policy and our idea of economy and go back to thinking about, well, we have to put some ceilings, not just the floor. Thank you.
Hello, I have some questions from our virtual participants. Brandon DeHart asks, I would love to know your thoughts on the potential application of assisted robotics and related technology to enable localized agriculture for northern communities that currently need to ship the vast majority of their foodstuffs across vast distances to survive, especially in extreme weather events we're seeing happening more regularly.
Yeah, and this is the problem with the political economy of technology, right? Because a lot of the research that's being done on robotics agriculture, like if you take the Guelph Institute, if you take the institute in UBC, it's all done for farming in this belt, the US-Canada belt. And that's always an issue with technology, and you all know that because of the way funding works in universities and so on. It's always for the benefit of profit. But it's very challenging to think about how it's not that there's only so much technology can do with respect to climate change. It's even a lot of the research proposals that you find, can we use a robotic technology to challenge all these changes that are happening in climate change, so on. But if you follow the amount of time it takes to create a technology, a robotic technology, because they're all super specialized for a specialized product, for a specialized use. So if you take that, it's always going to lag behind. And the issues that we have with the northern communities, it's a question of sovereignty and self-determination far more than coming up with robots to, I don't know what, to like transport the goods. I mean, like it's a question of self-determination, and it's a question of what climate change is doing to northern communities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the second question we have is from Paul Calhoun. It seemed like there was a thread that wasn't explicitly traced past the colonial plantation eras to feudalism. The workers on farms in similar positions to serfs for landlords who owe fealty to the agricultural corporations. Is this a fair way of getting closer to the root of the agricultural industry's roots?
Yeah, I've seen some literature which talks more. Okay, we are in the era of techno-feudalism. So, but I think a lot of that goes into this narrative that, look, it's what we are seeing is this capitalism not working properly. So what we are seeing is that, look, capitalism was supposed to replace feudalism, but we are going back to feudalism. So there is a problem in these kinds of things. And I think that's a great way. That's a fantastic perspective. But I've tried to avoid that to show that it's capitalism working precisely the way it was supposed to be. It's the plantation economy working precisely the way it's supposed to be. And that's one angle. So I think they're both very valid angles, and there's a lot to read from the literature of who talk about what's happening with techno-feudalism and so on, but this also is there.
Okay, that's it from online. Thank you.
When you mentioned degrowth, I actually also have a potential reading recommendation. It's a paper by Nantina Gonzalez, and it's called Toward Degrowth, Worker Power, Surveillance Abolition, and Climate Justice at Amazon.
Yeah, the Amazon one. I think
Yeah.
I know about this.
Yeah. Does anyone have any more questions? We have 4 minutes left in this panel. Would you like to have last words?
Me? No. That's all right. I'm done.
Thank you. We'll get the next panel set up. If you want to stretch your legs or grab a coffee, feel free, but we're going to get started in about 5 minutes. Thank you. And if the next panelists don't mind joining us up at the front, that'd be fantastic. Gonna catch